joining us tonight. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Representative Bill Henderson with us. Thank you, Representative Henderson, for joining us tonight. And then in place of Christine, we have Katie Cole from the newspaper today.
You get the fun job.
I know, Christine's sick, so.
Oh, lucky you.
So here I am.
First on the agenda, we have some minutes to approve. Can I hear a motion?
I so make a motion to approve the minutes of April 11th.
Second.
It's been moved by Trustee Merrill, seconded by Trustee Ketchum. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So our staff senate president, Rhonda Priest.
Hello, everyone. Hello, trustees. Thank you. Just a few things to share with you. First is that we had our brown bag luncheon this past month. And so Dr. Schaefer and Tammy Mays joined us. We had, I think, about 20 people, different areas of campus staff that were in attendance. And primarily the questions were around our compensation and classification study and that roll out. And so they were able to answer most of the questions. And it was pretty much as we expected, but appreciate both of them being there and providing that information for us. As I mentioned before, we have been working on our bylaws, which is never as easy as it should be. At least that's my opinion. And so we should be having, I think we'll be in a place where we'll have those approved at our next meeting. We're also in the process of having our elections and choosing our officers. And as we have had a full representation for the first time in, I think, recent history. And so we're having to think about what that needs to look like when it comes to having people move through and the terms that they will serve. So typically 2 years is what we'd like, but of course we don't need everybody rolling in and out at the same time. And so you'll probably, for those of you that are in areas of our campus, you'll see that we're going to have people that are going to be serving. This will be when they're up for re-election already, and then others will stay on for their additional year so we can get into that cycle. So hopefully half will be staying and half will be hopefully rolling out. They can continue to serve and be nominated and reelected, but we'll need to get into a cycle so that that works for the staff senate. We will also be nominating new officers, and so half of the officers will be rolling out, and I will be one of those officers that will be rolling out this time. And so we hope to have people in place by July 1 to start off our new year. And then we will be able to announce those new officers at our staff retreat, which is scheduled for June the 28th on our campus. That's all I have for you.
So Rhonda, you'll be with us one more time? At least.
Sure, I'll be here in June. Okay, look forward to seeing you then. Any other questions? Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rhonda. All right, our faculty senate president, Nate Houston.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm going to keep it even more brief than Rhonda did, as it is the end of the academic year. My only update for now is that we did elect new officers for the next academic year. So Sheridan Hansen, who teaches radiography, will be the secretary/treasurer. She looks forward to spending Dr. Harris's money at will. So we'll look forward to that. Michael Thompson, who teaches anatomy, physiology, amongst other courses, will be the vice president. And then somehow I have agreed, it's a blur, to return as president for next year. It happened really quick. And so
you weren't there.
I'll be there. Yeah. I think I went to the bathroom. And sure. So I'll be returning as president. So I look forward to another year here with the board and supporting faculty across campus. The last thing I'll say is just a couple of thank yous. First, to Dr. Schaefer for continuously meeting with Faculty Senate, providing support, answering some of our tough questions around compensation, amongst other topics this year. To Dr. Harris again for his money, joking, and again his support. It's nice to meet. I meet with him once every couple of weeks before we have Senate meetings. It's been an honor and a privilege. And then last but not least, a very special thank you to Rhonda. For me personally, this was a daunting sort of endeavor. I was a little nervous, still am probably, and Rhonda was a very constant sort of presence for me. We would bounce ideas off, and I couldn't think of somebody better to work alongside for this academic year, so I will miss that immensely. And that's it for me for this meeting. I may be here in June. I don't know if you're going to ask that. Preempt that. So
Any questions? Thanks, Nate.
thank you.
Okay, our next update, Vice President Johnson.
Good evening, everybody. A couple brief updates on the construction projects. So remember, we have 2 going on in different phases. Crossroads is well underway. I'm happy to report so far that we've demoed, we've put up new framing, we're now putting up insulation and some of this ceiling work in there. So it's progressing right along. We haven't encountered any nasty surprises, which is good. So we're on schedule, we're on budget with that. And just as a reminder, we hope to have that project done by mid-August. And we're hoping to have a tour tonight, but when I learned that we had a lot of particulate in the air that is kind of bad to be breathing, we're going to reschedule the tour. They'll be done with the insulation work this week, so whenever we think we want to reschedule that after this week, it should be fine. The library project, reaching its critical time when we're going to be talking about a guaranteed maximum price. Our construction manager at risk, GH Phipps, has been bidding out all the subcontract pieces. Most are done. There's a few minor ones left to go, but the ones that are done all came in good shape. In other words, we didn't get subcontractor bids that really pushed us into difficult waters. So we're feeling pretty good about that. Starting Monday, everybody in the library will be moving out. And for 2 weeks, we'll be getting that prepped for when we are still on schedule to what you'd call break ground June 4th. So everything's looking good there. We still have a little bit of work to do on the cost of the project so that we dial in the guaranteed maximum price properly, which we'll be getting to towards the end of the month. One little surprise piece for us this week is State DEQ has asked that they could come in and test for environmental hazards before we go too much further. And so they're going to come in either later this week or early next week. We're not anticipating any troubles. Back in 2002, I believe, or at least I was told, we tested, we had some renovation in the library. It was tested for asbestos and lead and all that at that time. And we're not aware of anything that's happened since then that would create an environmental hazard. So we think this is just going to be more of a formality, and then they'll give us the green light to continue on. So that's where we stand with both projects at this time.
Any questions? Thanks. All right, Vice President Harrison, a pathways update.
Good evening. I was going to share a little bit about, we had quite a delegation. We had 12 people, 5 faculty go to the American Association of Community Colleges conference. And part of that group went on the day before to the pre-conference, and it was a great activity. The whole pre-conference that day was on co-requisite math and English. And so we had 2 math faculty. We had Dr. Archie Nishley was there, and we had another couple more. We had a chemistry teacher. We had Dean Wilson and some others, and it was really good information. Gave them a lot of information to help us move that project forward. So overall, we had some wonderful sessions that we went to. Everything was pretty much tied around guided pathways. So we went through all these different sessions. Everybody was able to get some really good information on meta majors, advising, how to have smooth transition to college. I went to a really good workshop on their college success course, and that's one of those that will kind of be tied in and looking at general education. So it was really a worthwhile event. So I'll give the microphone to Judy.
Thank you. Other things we're doing on the ground here, all of the must-have groups have formed their teams, and so they've got their charter teams that are sort of the people that volunteered to be really close to the project and working long-term with it. And then the next level, which is, I think we're calling it the consultative feed or teams, and they are kind of an outer bubble who will be called in for different things and kept in the loop with that project. So that's kind of exciting because in some cases there were groups with, 70 people who are interested in that group. And that's all from the Taste of Pathways event. So that was a really, really exciting thing. So where they are now, they formed their groups, they're having their kickoff meetings and really formally starting their projects. And I think we've had one formal kickoff meeting that Clark attended, and several next week, and another one yet this week. So they're just really antsy to get going, and I think their groups themselves are really excited about the work too. Archie's over there nodding because they have been really antsy to get going. And then the next work to do, we'll be getting some training from Chad, Julie, and Janet on how to build timelines and work with that, and then put a big timeline together, which will be a ton of fun. And that it will help us all understand what the timelines of each project and how they blend with each other. And I'm looking very much forward to seeing that come together because that will help us understand how they interrelate. So that training is on Monday, and Julie Gershner just went to a training. She belongs to the Project Managers Institute. And she went to their conference and is bringing back a lot of good information to share with the teams on issues of how to motivate your team and how to manage your project, as well as how to kind of get things off on the right foot and get people working fast. So pretty exciting work. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I have one. When you're referring to project, are you also referring to the must-have teams?
Yes.
Okay.
They're each managing their work as a project.
Okay.
And that's why we have these other.
And so the must-have teams are getting ready to get together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I'm on one and I haven't received anything. Brady. Where are you?
You're probably in that outer bubble of the consultation teams.
Okay.
And so that's where you'll be getting some information, but I think they're first going to do their kickoff teams with their charter members. So, yeah.
What's a charter member?
The charter teams are the people that have volunteered to be on that team as a kind of a continuing workhorse on that project, and so they will consistently work through this until it's done for the most part. I'm sure some people.
Was that before the Taste of Pathways?
It was all from the Taste of Pathways,
Okay.
basically, and then some contributed electronically.
I guess my question, Mr. Chair, is when am I going to be asked to participate?
We'll probably be.
I can handle it, so the trustees don't make the staff feel uncomfortable. So there was,
That was not my intention. I was just trying to get some information.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. So there was some expression of certain trustees to be involved with the process. I made the decision that we wanted the core teams, the charter teams, really to be staff, so that there wasn't considerable influence on them from folks that are on the governing board. They've structured the teams so that there are charter teams, am I using the right terminology? Core teams, and then there are the supporting members of the team, consultants. Is that the language we're using? There is a roles responsibility. The consultant teams it's much a larger group, and they are going to be more fluid in and out. Trustees will be engaged and given the opportunity to be part of the consulting team, but we'll have staff focusing on the core charter for each of those groups. Does that make sense? So you will get a request. When and where, I'm not sure yet.
Mr. Chair, then once they figured out what they want to do, then they'll invite us to participate. I got it.
I've been invited already.
Good one.
Okay, who invited you? I'm gonna have a conversation.
Anyway, thank you very much.
We'll ferret out that discrepancy and equality.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was going to tell about one more thing. We have one group that is actually jumping in with more than both feet. They're a week from Monday. They're planning on doing a sprint, so they will come in. They're going to sequester themselves in a room for a week. And for a week, they're going to go home at night, but they're going to sequester themselves for a week. They're going to put away cell phones and everything, and they are going to put flip charts around, and we're going to try and develop our plan, our strategic plan, our plan for online education. So we're going to decide what are the qualifications for faculty, what is ongoing training that they should have, what are the requirements for a course to be online, what are the skills that we want students to have. We think once we identify those, we'll make sure that those are in Coles, but there's a book out called Sprint. And so they are taking that book and going to implement it. So in 1 week, and the good thing or bad thing is they've asked me to be part of that because I've had a lot of experience with online. So I'm going to try and not slip out too many times, but I do have some interviews I'm going to have to do in the meantime. But other than that, I'm trying to put all my other meetings. But it's going to be pretty exciting. So,
Mr. Chairman, Vice President Harris will be doing the jog while everybody else is doing the sprint, I think.
Sometimes it'll be a fast walk.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening, everyone. Just a few things I want to update you on. First, give you a quick update on WyoTech. It'll likely be my last update on WyoTech, although we haven't seen a lot of formal notification yet. Here's what I know. You've probably read in the paper and seen in the media that ECMC, the parent company of WyoTech, has signed a letter of intent with the private group that was working on the proposal to assume the operations of WyoTech, meaning they are negotiating and working in good faith on general parameters that they've come to some agreement on. I have been notified by the Business Council that they are proceeding with loan documentation and loan documents to loan the $5 million that was made available through the legislature this last session with the private entity. I don't know that I even know what the corporation name is, but it is essentially run by a gentleman named Jim Mathis, who was a former president of WyoTech. He's calling this a family-owned business because it is predominantly funded by family. And so they are moving forward and working through that process. I anticipate sometime in the near future we'll get a notification or hear from the governor's office. We'll make a formal announcement about this. But it looks like, while they still have work to do, that there's a solution in hand, and they're moving forward very proactively, and that WyoTech will continue its operations if all of the transition goes forward as it has in the past, with perhaps a more localized oversight and ownership that could hopefully contribute to the stability and longevity of the operations. I have been in contact and conversation with Mr. Mathis and the group working on that. I've expressed our interest in helping them with the transition, and more specifically, actually establishing some type of partnership where LCCC would be available to deliver the associate degree completion component of the automotive tech program at the WyoTech campuses on site to their students, while also hopefully providing an opportunity for the students that are completing the certifications at Laramie High School through our dual fusion program there. Give them an opportunity to actually move on and complete an associate degree in Laramie utilizing the WyoTech facilities. So that seems to be a desirable partnership from their end, and so we'll continue to work on that. I'll pause just to make sure there's any other questions, or I don't know, Trustee Cadle or if Brady wants to give any other update on their thoughts on WyoTech.
I don't think there's much out really yet. So.
Yeah. So we're kind of waiting for those last formal announcements too. But
Mr. Chair, before you move off of that, I think one of the lessons that we got as a result of this particular exercise and trying to help Laramie is the language in the statute as it pertains to when there's an annexation and how the participation of new representatives from Albany County would be part of our board and how that would go forward. And there's some confusion about really.
That's windy.
Okay. There's some confusion as to actually what the language in that
Wendy?
statute requires us to do. I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for us to ask our attorney to ask the Attorney General for an opinion on that particular annexation language. Because as I understand it, it could be interpreted more than one way. So would that be appropriate for us to do that at this time?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I mean, I'll certainly defer to Tara and whichever hat she chooses to put on at this point. As your attorney, and I think as a vested citizen and a member of the Wyoming Senate, she's explored that. And I think there's sincere interest now amongst multiple individuals to actually revisit those statutes and perhaps clean them up in the general session. So at this point, my recommendation would be that asking the Attorney General to try to weigh in is probably premature. I think their best approach is to see how the legislative session pans out.
Answered the right way.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to see that our legal counsel is moving forward on it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if you want to offer anything from.
Yeah, no,
Wendy?
I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
I think what we have learned in the last couple of years is that the community college statutory section as it relates to districts, just like Trustee Erickson was mentioning again, a concern over many of those statutes and the rules that govern us have to be looked at and reviewed and really updated in a more practical way. It's interesting that they haven't been utilized more frequently over the years, and there's been a lack of, I think, really thorough review of those statutes and how they apply. And so I think the time is right to really have a review, whether that be in this next session or to ask, if that's unsuccessful, or to ask the Education Committee to take it up holistically in an interim topic to have a review of that as well. So there's two strategies there to get some clarification legislatively as to what those mean and if they actually make sense, even with a legal opinion in place, right? So just to get it corrected on the front end, I think is probably the best path.
Thank you.
Wendy, just to give you a heads up, we are under the president's report right now and still talking about the Wyotech status and talking about the annexation statutes. So we're just finishing up that piece. Any other questions?
All right, I'll continue. So as you know, getting to the.
Is that a bus?
Oh, of course.
Oh, so she's
Hello?
losing signal.
Wendy?
I'm here.
Okay. Are you driving?
I am. I'm sorry I keep losing you.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm?
Thank you.
So commencement activities coming up Saturday, of course, always exciting. Hopefully you've received instructions. If you have not, I'll give you some right now. You're asked to show up at the Story Gymnasium, actually at the administration boardroom there at 9:15. You guys probably could get by with coming about 9:30 or so. We're trying to get everybody there, but we line up and proceed promptly at 10 a.m. So, please do try to get there sometime between 9:15 and 10 o'clock. We have the main commencement at 10 a.m. There's the nursing pinning ceremony that starts at noon. And then we have the high school equivalency. Oh, at 1, sorry.
Yeah.
1, right, lunch. I'm going to give you lunch at noon. Lunch at noon. Then the high school equivalency will start at 3 o'clock. As we go through there. So lots of great stuff going on. It'll be a busy day. I look forward to seeing you all there. I believe that Vicki has distributed your new wardrobe for the day in front of you. They are ultralight, ultra breathable. And we even requested it to be a cool day on Saturday. So just as easy as Mr. Chairman, members of the board, you do have a printout here. I have one extra. Daniel, I don't know if you want to share that. I always get I make our registrar and our institutional research departments very nervous when I start showing graphs and handing things around. And so I've been trained to make sure I tell you these are unofficial, non-validated numbers at this point. That's my disclaimer. But I do want to share this with you for an important reason, basically to show that the efforts we have been working on for so many years are starting to pay off. So what this shows you essentially is the credentials awarded each year, as well as the number of graduates that we've had. And if you remember, it was in 2014, I believe, where you set the goal of increasing credentials along with the other community colleges by 5% each year. And if you remember, those first 2 years we started doing that, we had record-setting classes. In fact, you'll see on the graph there, if you look at the top one, the credentials awarded or the graduates in FY15, 857 credentials. That was a record for LCCC. Well, a lot of that came from us saying completion's important. Let's take a look at the students we have swirling and let's help them succeed. So when we started that dialogue and really dug in, we saw those successful classes. But then you remember what happened after that. We started this downhill swing. Now, some of that was because we were getting students to complete who needed to complete. Some of that was a function of our decreasing enrollment. But what's, I think, the most positive to look at now is what's happening at a time where our enrollment has essentially bottomed out. You know, it's not increasing. When we look at what's happening this year, our credentials will actually increase, are up by 8.1% from last year. And our number of graduates are up 6.4% in that 1 year. So what we're starting to see are the major reforms and changes that we put into place essentially in the fall of 15, which would be FY16. In 2 years later, we're starting to see those trends. And so I just share that with you because I know a lot of folks have really said, but is it making a difference? And we can start to see now, a couple of years into that work, that we're back on the incline. And it's not a function of just increasing the number of students coming in. Our faculty, our staff, our campus is really getting better at helping students achieve their educational goal. And you can see it in the numbers here. So I thought that would be something exciting for you to see as we talk about commencement and the ceremonies that happen this Saturday.
Very cool, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick update. The Wyoming Community College Commission held a meeting here a couple of weeks ago. I know you'll probably get an update from Trustee Salazar and Trustee Erickson, so I won't go into a lot here. Just a few things. As I think you all know, they have announced Dr. Rose's replacement. So Dr. Sandy Caldwell, who is currently the president of Reedley College in California, will be starting in June, I believe, as the next executive director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. She actually has significant Wyoming history, worked for Western Wyoming Community College, and I think they had two fantastic candidates. And so Sandy will be a wonderful addition, and I really look forward to working with her in this new capacity. The presidents during these meetings did sit down and meet with Jeremiah Riemann, who's heading up the Governor's NDOW initiative, to talk about legislative action during this past session pertaining to NDOW and how that may or will intersect with community colleges. Certainly we see that there'll be relationship and connection with that. In many ways, the development of the programs that will stem from that legislation are still in the works. And so we aren't exactly sure, for example, what the role of the community colleges will be in the Kickstart Wyoming program focused on entrepreneurship and new business startups, or the workforce development program and things like that. What's important and what I want to share to you is that we are having regular and very in-depth conversations with Jeremiah and the NDOW folks to make sure that we're an active partner in that work. I do want to just call out something that has come up recently, and you'll probably hear about it in the press if you haven't already. After our time in Jackson here earlier this winter, with the NDOW Executive Council and a broader group that included community college students, the governor took an interest in identifying how NDOW could bring in the younger voice to the work that we're doing. And at that time, he was interested in what he called the Youth Summit From that has grown a group that's called Engage. I can't tell you what that acronym stands for now, but what I'll tell you is essentially the group of young folks that were part of that session who said we need to bring our voice to economic diversification conversations in the state, if for no other reason than for their future. And our very own Jasmine Barros, who's an employee in Outreach and Workforce Development, but also a student of ours, is helping lead that group and some of the activities associated with it. June 9th in Laramie will be the NDOW Engage Summit, the youth summit, if you will. It's focused on Wyoming youth ages 16 to 35, pretty broad range, and will be a day or so really focused on bringing that perspective into our conversation about economic diversification. They've got a great agenda. If you just Google NDOW Engage, you'll be able to see all about it. I can send you a link to it. But really the biggest piece I want to encourage you is if you know somebody that fits that demographic, 16 to 35, encourage them to check it out, encourage them to participate and be part of the conversation. So very exciting. It's nice to see that coming together.
You sent us that.
I already sent. Oh, good.
You sent it already?
Mhm.
Oh.
Yes, I did. And then the commission meeting was pretty straightforward, actually short. There will be conversation coming up about tuition strategy and lots of good stuff at their June meeting. But as I said, I'll let Trustees Salazar and Erickson cover that piece. The last thing, Mr. Chairman, is I just want to make you aware of this. I think you've seen this, and I've probably shared this with you via email as well. Wyoming applied to be considered for a grant program that WICHE in collaboration with the Lumina Foundation was working on. And it's a grant program that's intended to identify states that they want to work with that have a sincere interest in closing the attainment gap, increasing the percent of the adult population with a post-secondary credential. So Wyoming was chosen along with Utah and Arizona to be part of that grant program. Organization meeting will kick off next week for the core teams from each of those states. It'll be in Westminster, Colorado, on the 15th and the 16th. Wyoming has a core team that will be chaired by Dr. Lori Nichols and myself, as well as including Jeremiah Riemann, Jillian Balo, Jim Rose, some other folks from NDOW and other areas. And then we'll have a larger state team that will work on some of the state strategies, most of which are pulled from the Complete College Wyoming group. So the primary purpose of this is for us to work with experts to establish a series of strategies for Wyoming to increase higher education attainment. So it fits well with the governor's, executive order, the resolutions that the commission and the trustees or the UW trustees have passed. And so it's really going to be a nice opportunity for us to have a little oomph with some support from the Lumina Foundation and WICHE to develop those strategies and get that off the ground. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I will stop there and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? All right. We'll move forward. So as we get into the approval items, I'm just going to remind the board that I will ask for the presentation questions, and then I'm going to ask for public comment before we make a motion. So just to give you guys a heads up. But with that said, Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As I discussed at your last meeting, we are at that stage in time with the operating agreement with the LCCC Foundation, in which you are required to do a mandatory review and consideration before you execute the last 3 years of that agreement. So we set that agreement up very purposefully to provide a longer term window for stability for the foundation. So it has a 6-year duration of the terms, but we inserted a 3-year mandatory review very purposefully so that it would trigger us to make sure that new trustees had the opportunity to examine and look at the operating agreement and be comfortable with moving forward with the next 3 years. I believe Vicki emailed you the operating agreement. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through that. It is my recommendation at this time that you approve that 3-year agreement or 3-year extension, and we continue in the great partnership that we have with the foundation.
Mr. Chair, are there any changes?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, not at this time. I would say the amendment that we executed during the budget cut years stays into effect. And so for the last 3 years of this, we basically are 1 year shy of what the original, compensation schedule was, if you will, or the funding schedule was. Other than that, there are no changes. I will say that there is some conversation about whether or not we may want to explore an amendment to utilize the foundation to handle some of the investments and things that the college does that may be more appropriately held through the foundation. I don't have a whole lot of detail on what those are at this point, but I know Vice President Johnson and Associate Vice President Trimble have been talking about those. So it's possible we'll see another amendment down the road, but at this point, there are no changes to the original operating agreement other than the one amendment because of the budget cuts.
Which, and that amendment was back a year ago, or, yeah. Okay. I make a motion that we approve the contract.
Any other questions?
So I jumped to, yep.
Any other public comment? I'd like to hear a motion.
I so move. That we approve the extension for the next 3 years.
Second. Moved by Trustee Erickson, seconded by Trustee Ketchum. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just keep moving through here. So the other approval item that you have on your agenda tonight is your second reading of the compensation policy. You received that at your last meeting as a first reading. The only change that's been made is the one small change that Trustee Erickson recommended at the last meeting, just for clarity, and the one item. Other than that, it's happy to answer any questions, but it's before you for your approval. You have the staff recommendation.
Any further questions from the board? Any public comment?
Mr. Chair, I'm Archie Nisley. I think most of you know me. I teach in the education department here at LCCC. I've been here 15 years, and I've always tried to face the changes at LCCC with a positive attitude. I'm going to read my statement, so I stand under the 5 minutes and don't get too emotional. I will, of course, respect whatever decision you make tonight, but I would like to share my 3 concerns about the compensation policy. First, I know this model is supposed to be externally competitive, using market data that can be easily updated. And I do understand the argument that it's difficult to recruit and retain faculty in some program areas like healthcare because they can make a lot more in the private sector. However, we are an educational institution, and once we come here to teach, we all have the same job descriptions with the same responsibilities. The college is hiring nursing instructors and not nurses who make a choice to give up long shifts on their feet and the stresses of an emergency room. I worry that LCCC can't pay the same rate as the market, so in the future, the gap among the faculty bands will continue to become wider, trying to keep up with that market. I would suggest that we give hiring bonuses or bring those faculty in at a higher level, but on the same pay scale. My second concern is that instead of being a model that's easily understood, this model will create more complications. We have to create several procedures in order to determine how faculty will be compensated fairly for work that's above and beyond the 50th percentile. What will those criteria be for being a superstar or a WOW faculty? How will those be evaluated? What will be the time and compensation increments? This process can also be subjective depending on the deans. I've had 5 deans since I've been here, and 4 of them have given me the highest exceeds expectation ratings. One gave me a lower meets expectation rating, and when I asked how I could be a better teacher, I realized that I hadn't dropped in my performance. The dean was interpreting the criteria differently. So if we work on a major project like Guided Pathways, would that be considered going above and beyond? Would we move up on the scale and be compensated for our time and effort? or would the administration have a different interpretation? I would suggest that if you would like to reward work that's above and beyond, you could give stipends or bonuses. And if some faculty are not doing their job, we should use the evaluation processes which are already in place to address individual issues. And finally, I am really glad that this model is fiscally responsible. I realize some employees were below the market minimum, and I'm glad that they are going to be given a fair wage. I'm also grateful that I haven't lost any of my pay. I'm making what I did last year and what I'll continue to make until 2022. However, I don't believe that this model is internally equitable. Although I haven't lost a penny of my pay, I have lost my morale. Many of you know I was born in Pakistan, where education is difficult for a lot of people, especially women. So after my father passed away, my mom gave up her job and her family in Pakistan came here. Sorry, I can do it. To clean houses. She took care of the elderly, all so that Rakshi and I could have an education. And I tell you this because I want you to know how much I appreciate the value of hard work and the benefits of a good education. And I do believe in the American ideal of equality. I choose to teach, not for the money, but to honor my father's memory and my mother's sacrifices. And I love my students, and I've given all to LCCC. But with this model, I feel like LCCC is telling me that you value me as a level 2 employee, that no matter how hard I work here, I will not even have the opportunity to be compensated at the same level as my colleagues. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Archie, for your comment. I would assume, maybe I'm not correct here, but I would assume that once we approve this policy, procedures will be then brought forward to address many of your concerns. I would think, because I have spoken previously about the difficulty of dealing with performance review and merit increases, and the difficulty of going from objectivity to mostly subjectivity. So I really share your concern, but I would hope that we're going to see procedures that are going to address the concerns that you've enumerated this evening. And if not, I can tell you, I'm one trustee that will probably respond in a way that I would like to see that.
Mr. Chair, Trustee Erickson, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Mr. Chair, Archie, I'm looking, Archie, I'm looking at the policy and I don't see, can you tell me specifically what language it is that you're, because I like Dawn, expect that there's going to be procedures that follow this policy. So I don't understand. I need you to help me understand.
Mr. Chair, Trustee Little, I think the different bands is my biggest concern, that some faculty are band 1 and some are band 8. I feel all faculty have the same job description and we should be on the same band so we have the opportunity to prove to you our merit and have the same opportunity to make it to the highest level possible. So
I'm not seeing anything about.
And that might be, the letter that we received as faculty members or as staff as well, showing us where we are on our bands and where we are on the percentiles.
We have that matrix on there that shows.
This does?
This doesn't, that's what she's saying.
Oh.
We received it was.
Oh, okay.
A while ago. It shows the matrix of where everybody is.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Trustee, thank you.
Okay. So what, there's something I'm not understanding.
So it's like the state PMI. Just to
Uh-huh.
give you a brief example of what you're used to. So it's like
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that. So if you're an administrator or below, you have a certain category, A, B, C, D, so that your job performance is high up here.
Mhm.
So then you have to meet these certain expectations to fall even into this matrix.
Mhm.
So what she's saying, everybody she feels is at this one top level.
Mhm.
And then she's feeling that everybody at this top level can prove themselves to go higher. See what I'm saying?
Okay.
There shouldn't be
Is that a
portion.
part of this policy? That's not what I'm.
It is part of
Okay.
the actual compensation policy.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, Trustee Little, thank you, Trustee Ketchum, for trying to do that. So the component of your policy so you set the policy, and the components of your policy are well described in there in terms of the alignment with the market, the internal equability, the things that Dr. Nisley so wonderfully articulated up there. Our procedural interpretation is what establishes the pay bands, if you will, that are aligned to market and market data. Specifically for the faculty positions, we use the Coupa HR data, so the college and university professionals, human resources, salary data that is actually structured by discipline. And based on those data and based on the market, there are certain disciplines, even at the 2-year level, that command higher wages on average. And thus, there are levels based on discipline that say faculty in this discipline are being paid on this band. And so a component of this model is that every position has a broad classification as well as a categorization in a level to some point. And so what Archie is articulating is that while we have faculty who teach different disciplines, the responsibilities of teaching are that teaching of service to the college of that, which renders the discipline irrelevant. Try not to put words in your mouth to do that. And while there's merit to that, our interpretation and implementation is that based on the market, though, there is significant variation in the disciplines that exist, in part because of the subject matter, in part because of the pathway to the profession, in part because of the supply and demand and basic economics that necessitate a different level of compensation for us to be successful in recruiting and retaining. And so one of the things we've been trying to articulate, and it's tough when you think about value and all of that, is that we need to shift the dialogue away from saying, do we value a faculty, an education faculty, less so than a nursing faculty or health science faculty, to do we value an education faculty more than what any other community college in our region would value them based on what we compensate? And so it's a shifting perspective. And remember, our goal here is to retain and recruit to do that. So we have to be competitive with other institutions for that similar field. But it's hard for people internally who have been working with colleagues across disciplines to not feel that I'm valued less because of what the market says I'm worth, to do that. The other thing that I'll point out she always does a wonderful job of articulating her perspectives and being objective, and that's what I love about you, Archie. Is that there is ambiguity at this point with what we are going to do above the 50th percentile. We knew from a fiscal perspective that we had a pretty good leap getting everybody to that new minimum. Now we set new aggressive pay scales and we said, okay, so what does that look like based on the market? That's that minimum. Then we said, okay, let's get everybody who's below that now there. And that's going to be priority number one. Then we set the policy or the procedural expectation that for us to be an employer of choice and to be placed competitively within the market, we'll start everybody at the 25th percentile. So you will not start at 0, you'll start at the 25th percentile.
I remember this discussion.
Which is telling us, hopefully telling our employees, we value you more than what other institutions will by where we're willing to place you. And if you remember when we first drafted this policy, there was considerable feedback, I think even by Madam President Priest at that time from the staff, about the interest in having a longevity component in this policy. So part of this model now includes those 5 longevity increments. And what we're telling employees that within 5 years at LCCC, we will get you to the 50th percentile in the market. A benchmark generally acquired when you're 15 years into your profession. to do that, as you know, and you'll hear in the budget presentation, and that's a $1.2 million lift for us in the next 2 years. So while I understand there's ambiguity when we get above the 50th percentile, it's going to take us 2 years just to get people there. And when we get people there, we will be more competitive, I believe, than any other community college within the region. And we will really get people to where they should feel valued for what they do for us and the great work that they do. Only then can we really start digging into, okay, now how do we start to align increments with preferred qualifications, let alone how do we start to align that advancement in the scale with the wow factors and things like that. So I recognize there's ambiguity there, but it's going to take us a while to get there. But we're moving 200 employees in phase 2. I mean, that's the majority of our, well, more than half, I shouldn't say majority, of our employees will be moving. When you look at phase 1 and phase 2, it's moving the majority of our employees in those market adjustments. And so we've opted to move the majority and move at that level to get them on target versus getting into the ambiguity of the performance piece that I'll be honest, we don't know exactly how that's going to work, and it's going to be tied to our performance management system. So she's right, there's that ambiguity, and I would say it's a necessity, and it's more important for us to start to move those folks now than to work on that piece of it and not do anything there. So, and then the last thing that I would say, just to let folks know, because of the way we structured this, I believe that it will be not only feasible, but probably pretty regular, that we will have employees at lower levels in their categories that will actually be making more than people who have the potential to make more based on the way we did this system. And so while that potential is always there for the highest tier, say a faculty 8, to make a certain threshold, we will have faculty level 2s who will be making more than faculty level 8s because they are superstar performers and rock stars. And so we have to couch in mind that not every level is going to make the maximum the way we've structured this. And so in my mind, people will, even at the low levels, have the opportunity to actually command a higher salary than folks that have a higher level. And more importantly, when they do that, I believe that they will be, that should demonstrate considerably more value that we place on them than what any of the other community colleges, any other employees, and I would argue universities and other employers in the region would value our individuals. So,
I have a question that's not going to be nice. What does this mean for Archie?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Trustee Merrill, it's really not my position to talk about a specific personnel matter at this meeting to do that. So,
I'll Mr. Chair, Trustee Merrill, I'll be making this, what I'm making till 2022, and I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the future of it. Dr. Schaefer, thank you so much for explaining and making part of my argument for me and constantly helping me see the benefit. I do see that, but I did want to take the opportunity to that.
Can I say one thing? I'm trying to remember back to when we were looking at the original view of this, when we had some paperwork over there and up there. And what I recall in the discussion, being a statistician, I was wanting to know about the averages and the distribution of how things happened. But one of the things that I recall, and I should look at my notes to go back, but I don't want to be flipping papers, was that there might be a one-off exceptions. I don't know if it was true, where you might have situations where you had to look at it specifically. But now when I'm hearing President Schaefer talk about one particular thing, it's like trying to think about my time value of money. And if a person's getting something in 5 years that they might have to wait 15 years for, that seems like that's better than waiting. It's better to get it earlier than it is to get it later. So I don't know if each person had some tool where they could look at this, and maybe already have done it, could look at this and see what is my time value of money view of this, and 6 months, and how could that be addressed? It's just more of a question than it is
yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Salazar, so the communication, and I'm happy if you want to see a sample, Executive Director Mays can give us a sample so that you can see, the communication of where that moves and how they place on that has been put out, will be put out in phase 2 as well. I don't know that we've done sort of the statistical comparison to show what's the value of your dollars by getting them now than what would be in the traditional model to do that. It'd be interesting to see that, because if you looked at it from a compounding perspective, our aggressive approach to get people to the 50th percentile within 5 years of employment, what that would mean cumulatively for their total earnings over their duration here is significant. And I'm sure we've got wonderful statisticians on the board and elsewhere that might be able to model that. But that has been part of the value proposition we've been trying to communicate. It's just tough. It's even as a model that's trying to be somewhat simple, there's complexity to it and there's emotions to it as well. The one piece I will say is that there are two things, and again, maybe as a segue eventually to Vice President Johnson and the budget. I don't believe and I don't hope that folks that are already above the 50th percentile will truly be frozen in their current compensation for till 2022 in the as Archie has articulated, for a couple of reasons. First, within our model, and as we've discussed, we will still consider inflation as a reason to move the market bands. And so our model does allow for cost of living adjustments. Whether that's by the board or by other indication, where we will actually say, hey, the dollar isn't worth what it was 5 years ago, we need to move the band. And so that will move our bands as we review the markets and as we review inflation. And so it's very possible that there will be cost of living adjustments that you may say we need to do. And we've done this in the past where it'd be 1% 1 year, 2.5%. So a person's placement on that band doesn't necessarily change, but their value of that placement does. So I truly believe that's the case. Two, I believe that we can't continue to bear the full burden of having a competitive market-based compensation model, and that's just our community college. And I'm probably speaking even a little bit ahead of term, but given the improving economic perspective in Wyoming, and irregardless of our continued work to try to close the K-12 issue there, I'll be, unless you tell me elsewise, I will be asking my fellow presidents and others to make a push for a compensation plan in probably in the supplemental session. I think we simply have to answer the phone. I don't know that we can continue to just expect our best and brightest to stay in that spot and not to have our compensation plans adjust to the market. And this isn't just community colleges, this is the state and others. We're going on, 5 years now, and 6 years. The revenue picture is improving, and even if it wasn't, it's time for us to say we value our employees. And so my hope is that will get some traction, if not in the supplement or the general session, the supplemental budget, then certainly in the budget session to do that. And if that happens again, we would treat that as a market adjustment in this process. And so those bands would move accordingly. And then hopefully folks like Dr. Nisley would not be frozen in their spot till 2022. So
Thank you for spending that time and explaining that. Thanks, Justin. I understand now what's going on.
Have a motion?
I so move.
Second.
All right, did you move to approve or to
Conversation
adopt policy 6.11? Carol, is that, okay, thank you.
It's been moved by trustee Merrill and seconded by trustee Erickson. Yes. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, under your work agenda items, in the essence of time, you can guide me. Chad Marley, our Chief Information Officer, Technology Officer, is here. You have two policies that are before you for first reading, as we've done in the past. First reading policies, they're here for your information, for your review. Happy to answer any questions. If you'd like, Chad's here, can walk you through them. There's no action required of you tonight. It'll be before you in your June meeting, but I'll leave it to you if you want to ask Chad to walk you through them, or if you have specific questions, we can do that. Otherwise, you can certainly review and they'll be back before you in a month.
Any questions on those two? All right. On to the budget.
Thank you. Thanks, Chad, for being here. You've got to get out of jail free card. So I appreciate that. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm actually gonna be quiet here and ask Vice President Johnson to come to the podium to present to you the first reading of the FY19 budget. As he makes his way up here, I was quipping this to Rick the other day, thinking back to my journey at the college and working with wonderful people like Jane Myrick to try to read the tea leaves of the board's interest in a very inclusive, transparent, effective budget process. And so I spent considerable time having to prep and think about how that was developed and presented. And I was just telling Rick the other day how wonderful it's been for these last 2 years with Jane and Rick working together, and how these budgets have come together, even in some pretty austere times. And like I said, I just wanted to take the opportunity to publicly thank them both because of the pressure that it's relieved from my shoulders, and what a wonderful job they do at shepherding this process all the way up to the first reading that Rick and Jane have put together essentially on their own with the help of the committees that we have going. So you've got some pretty fantastic employees in these two. And Rick, Jane, I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, good evening again. I'm pleased to be presenting this to you tonight because we do have a balanced budget for you, and that's always, that first difficulty we have. Joe, that was a really good segue because there's some thank yous I think that really are in order here. And the first one is Jane. It's compelled to point this out. This process here, Jane was an enormous amount of effort into it, with great diligence, thoroughness. It's perfect. You sit down with Jane and we'll go through the what ifs, the devil's advocates, and it's unbreakable. Jane, my gratitude to you. I also want to point out the two committees you're aware of. I'm not going to read all the names, but I think it's important to point out these people on campus. We have the BPAC committee. They come together a couple times a year. They look at the process. They make recommendations. They do evaluations of how the process is working. They do great work. And then this BRAC committee, they do the heavy lift with the budget requests, evaluating what people have asked for, asking the hard questions, challenging leadership over budget asks and so forth. And so there's just a whole lot of good work that goes on here. Of course, these two committees are both chaired by Jane and Kim Bender. The big takeaway on this, before I get into it, is the budget process at LCCC is truly a campus process. And it's really remarkably very good. Okay, I'm going to spend a little time talking about what the key drivers have been for the F19 budget. There's some upside ones I'm going to talk about: the energy markets, local economies around the state, and the legislature. Of course, there's always some downsides. There's one in particular that relates to lagging enrollment effects, and I'll get into that, which has set the foundation for how we put the budget together. Well, let me start with economics in the energy markets. So you've seen these in the past. I just think they're really interesting to revisit. Top row 16, 2017, and 2018. These are all March over March over March. So things have changed a little since March, obviously. But if you look at these numbers, these are all gas prices. Last year we saw 70% gain. Now it's dropped 14% in March. These are oil prices. We all know what's going on with the oil market. We were up 32 last year, then up 26. We're even higher than this now. Oil's staying steady at the high 60s. And then coal prices are up 8%. And last year they were up 21. It's just stunning to me. You're going to see a different story on coal in a second. This is production. So, by the way, all the data comes from one economic analysis. Gas production down in 16, down again in 17. Now it's come up. Remember, gas prices are down, but production's up. Oil production is down. This number's got to be higher than what was shown in March. But a great story building there. And then coal, it's got this opposite effect. Down, up, down again. Production, like coal production is down, the price is up. Digging in, drilling in a little deeper here. If you look at oil and gas around Wyoming, this dark band are the jobs, and this increase in jobs around the state continues to increase. We got a rig count at 30, and by the way, I think rig count in Colorado is at 29, so we're surpassing rig count there. Very interesting. You're going to see in a few minutes how all this is playing through in the Wyoming economics by county. I noticed in the Denver Post, April 27th, there was this great story. It's much longer than this, but look at the headline: drillers head to Wyoming say Colorado's too unfriendly. And what really caught my eye was the end of the article, which I'll read for you. Wyoming this year could see a 5-fold jump in drilling permits over 2 years ago. Boy, if that plays out, that's going to be remarkable. Okay, let me move over to the economic metrics for Wyoming. The Wyoming Division of Economic Analysis tracks a lot of stuff. This is just some highlights that relate really to local economies, which really matter to us with the community college funding model. You've got Wyoming as a whole, you've got Casper, and you've got Cheyenne, and they do a lot of comparing just those three. And these are various monitoring sectors. Look at Wyoming as a whole. The green triangle leads at top, the red leads down, and most of the green. Casper's doing pretty good. Oddly, Cheyenne, down on non-farm employment, down on labor force, and down on building permits. I don't know if you remember last year at the budget presentation, but I was showing you a chart where Cheyenne was up big time in building permits, like 69 permits. This year, it's 39. And I don't know what's crazy. Maybe we just had a bit of a bubble last year. But when you study this, you find that while the labor force has declined right across these three areas, everything else is really in great shape. Now, this is sales and use tax, which seems to be a pretty good measure for how we're doing around the state. And this is by industry. And if you look at these majors, there's only one major that's gone backwards, and that's the information industry, whatever that is. And everything else is way up. And stunningly, to me anyway, mining up 71%. And so statewide, that overall number's up 18%. So really remarkable thing. Then when you look at county, you see a similar thing. We've only got 4 counties out of the 23 that are down. All other counties are way up. The Converse up 86.6%. But what really matters to us would be the energy producing community college districts. So we got Fremont with Central, we got Natrona with Casper College, and Sweetwater with Western. And look at those numbers, 11, 11, 2, 3. These are great numbers to see because in the past, when those have dipped, we paid some price in our share of the funding model. So, energy's bouncing back, local economy's strong, and what we think this means is we think we'll see a funding increase from the commission in August. In July, they'll get their valuation data from all the assessors. They'll run their machine, and the results, I think, are going to be a funding increase over what we've been planning this budget with. So I hope I'm not wrong, but there's a lot of indication that's going to be the case. Okay, moving on to the legislature. There's really no big surprises. Funding was slight. You may remember, and I'm even losing track what this was, Joe, but the system maybe could have took a $5 or $6 million hit, but the governor interceded. And we avoided that. But here's a great piece of news out of the legislative session. Our funding for major maintenance is increasing by 1.8 million. That's like a 64% increase in major maintenance funding. So we're going from 2.8 to 4.6 million over the biennium. That's fantastic for us because, you know, we do have an aged infrastructure. We've got a lot of roofs with problems and, you know, all this sort of thing. And this is really going to help us, you know, invest in infrastructure over here. There was House Bill 109, which modified the Wyoming retirement structure. This is affecting us a little bit. Let me just orientate you to this table. The first row is employee contribution as a percent of salary. So employees going from now to next year will pay 0.25% more as part of their contribution to the retirement program. And actually, over the 4 years, it's 0.25% every year. The employer's share of the employee's contribution, I think it's too complicated to explain all that, but it's staying level. But where we're getting an effect out of this, us, is the employer contribution, the part that we contribute. From now to next year goes up 0.25%. And for us, that's about $18,000 additional cost that we're absorbing. And of course, that continues out over these 2 budgets. So you're going to see this number pop up here a little bit later. Now, the downside, the enrollment. Let me go ahead and get you to these 2 charts. In your board book, by the way, there's like the enrollment history of LCCC back in 1960. I wanted to dial in on kind of what's happening. This is showing in the green line unduplicated headcount, and in the orangish line, FTE. And over here are the annual credit hours generated from the students we have. So, great news. Finally, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in headcount, 0.8%. Last 9 years, for the last 7 years, it's just been a steady decline. However, our FTE is decreased 2.6%. And then when we look at credit hour, we've lost 3% there. Why this matters is we've got more students that are taking less hours, is the conclusion, and that's a revenue impact. If we had more students taking more hours, we'd be seeing the gains of the more students, and actually we're realizing this opposite effect. So it's something that causes us all to kind of scratch our heads a little bit about why is that way here. I don't know that we've fully figured that out. But. Okay, that lays the foundation for where we're going with the budget. I'm going to move over here. You may recall this particular chart last year, which really is what formulates the basis for what new monies are we getting and how's that going to impact what we can distribute for next year. So I think of it as our puts and takes, of the budget picture. So the top section is really the takes. And the bottom section, in this case, are really the puts. Let me walk through that. So up above, you have the first 2 rows, state aid and local appropriation. Last August, when we got through recapture, redistribution with the commission, we actually took a impact of $157,000, which is what you're seeing there in red. But at the same time, we've got a local appropriation increase of $191,000. So kind of washed itself out. This April, which happens every year, the commission gives us their best guess on where the funding model's headed. And they're saying that on the state aid component, we're going to take an $11,000 reduction. We're actually not sure that'll stay that way. That might go positive by the time we get to recapture, but we'll see. The biggie for us is this next one you see of taking a hit of $343,000. That's tuition. That's due to the declining enrollment. And, if we could fix that, then we could fix a lot of stuff, but that's a tough one. Business training, that $10,000 you see, that's purely a budget adjustment in Mary Ellen Tass's area of what she thinks she's going to be doing in business next year. Because of the declining enrollment, we have course fee reductions. A few months ago, Cabinet made the decision to discontinue the graduation fee. So we lost $9,000 in revenue there. And that was to help the student have a more efficient process finishing up here at LCCC. And then with the declining enrollment, athletic fees will be down $18,000. So when you net that, our net losses are $346,000. Now, the other side of it, these internal funds, as we call them, you'll see this move that we've made over the years back and forth IT technicians and IT operating expenses, we're moving off the current fund and moving it back to 1 mil. So that's generating about $500,000 or more on the current fund of available money for us. We're moving the college insurance over to the 1 mil. That's the 444 that you see there. And then a new thing this year is a retiree health insurance rate holiday, which is looks to be giving us a gain. Then you see the section of vacant positions. These are positions that have been vacant for more than 12 months, and some of them longer than that. And so those are not going to be refilled. Most of them, if not all of them, are going to be reallocated, which I'll get into in a moment. So we're generating about $300,000 there. So when you look at this in sum, we've got net losses of 346, but net gains of 1.4 million. So what that leaves us at the bottom right there is $1,081,000 that we can then redistribute for next year's budget. Oops. So now I'm going to walk through what we propose to do with that $1,081,000 and how we're going to allocate it across the budget of the school. So this first panel titled Compensation Package, I'll touch on a couple of key things. We've already talked about it a little bit. The compensation study phase 1 that we implemented in February, that $192,000 you see there, that's covering that part. Then the biggie is year 1 of phase 2. And remember, phase 2 is getting implemented over 2 years. So year 1 of phase 2 is costing us $632,000. Now we have that $632,000 again next year. And we do feel like we'll be able to make that happen at this time. So that's your compensation program pulling through in this budget formulation for 19. Then we have market adjustments. These are known increases that have happened that we know are there, so they need to go forward. Performance incentives is a topic that I think it's fair to say Joe's given some thought to, kind of a placeholder right now. Now, you see the row employer retirement contribution, $18,206. That's that $18,000 I showed you on House Bill 109, where they equating to that 0.25% increase in our contribution. Then we always budget for educational advancements that tend to happen over the course of the year. So a full $1 million is getting reinvested right there in compensation related areas. Now, as we go through, we kind of go through each program on campus or division, you might say. So academic affairs, we're taking some of that vacancy savings, reinvesting in a clinical coordinator. That's the first one you see there. Academic affairs also has taken a reduction in their operating budget of $51,000. Then you see the course fees there falling in that we talked about a moment ago. So net academic affairs is growing by $10,000. Then we get to student services, a private area that's had the biggest growth. We're adding an advisor for $56,000. Slight increase in the operating budget. I believe most of that's related to some software that we've implemented called Recruit. And then we have some scholarships of $47,000 that came over to the current fund from 1 mil, which is where it was before. So student services will be up $127,000. Then we get to the president's budget. You see an increase there of $36,000. That's actually in the trustee budget, not in Joe's part of it. And that's really relating to some travel, the election, and enrollment strategy, which focuses on the trustees' budget that was put together. This panel then finishes out the distribution. Albany County campus takes a reduction of $50,000 that they've come forth with, which was very helpful. Institutional effectiveness, we've got 2 positions that we intend to establish. Remember, these new positions are coming from the reallocated the positions that have been empty for more than 12 months. Slight, very slight, almost negligible operating budget reduction for institutional effectiveness, $163. Then we get to institutional advancement, up by 6,000. And the reason that's up is some sponsorships moved into this budget from the president's budget where it wasn't before. So it's really a net wash. And then a biggie, my area, administration and finance, we've actually reduced the budget by 365,000. Now, let me stop there and speak to that a minute. This really relates to utilities. You recall that we were fixing a lot of gas lines and upgrading gas line piping fittings. A lot of work being done at LED lighting around campus. So our consumption has really reduced. And we're going to study this a little more deeply, but it looks like we've reduced consumption maybe 17%. Huh. Which seems to me to be a really remarkable number. We also had a little bit of cushion in that budget, but we used to have worse winters. And as you know, the last 3 for sure have been pretty mild. Last 2, and this one particularly mild. So we don't need to be carrying quite that much budget. If climate trends change, then we can flex to that. But this savings you see here, 365, has really enabled a lot of budget maneuverability, as you can tell, and mainly coming from this utility savings that we've accomplished, or physical plant has. And then lastly, you'll see a reserve for future academic program expansions. Joe could speak to this, but I think this is a placeholder for Joe. To where he might have 3 positions that he could go forth with to bolster academic programs. I don't think any decisions have been made what this might be, but think of it as a placeholder. So at the bottom there, you again see the $1,081,000, which is a full distribution of the puts and takes of where we ended up. I forgot to mention, if you notice in the top right-hand corner of most of these slides, you'll see a board book reference in blue. If you want to follow in the board book, it tells you what page you'll find this data. Yes, please.
So it looks like we basically taken funds out of the 1 mil fund and moved it over to the general fund.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to the 1 mil right now.
Well, we come up with the extra $4 million.
Yeah, we moved. Yeah, and this is what has been our pattern over the last few years of this back and forth with certain things to create the flexibility where we need it.
And then one other question, going back to when we talked about the community college commission allocation, all community colleges. We said last year that went down because the overall state valuation was down. And so that distribution was less to LCCC. Correct?
Yeah, others were down, so we moved some of ours to help them be better off. And so the reverse happens when it's reversed.
Okay.
If theirs goes up.
So it doesn't necessarily have a direct correlation to the valuation.
It does.
In that particular county.
It does.
Because obviously in Laramie County, I see where our valuation went up and we got a plus, where we got more funds from our mill levy from the valuation in Laramie County.
Yeah, what the commission's doing is they're taking the valuations from all the counties of the 7 colleges, dropping that into their funding machine, and it rebalances, which is why they call it recapture redistribution process, and then produces results in a
fair and equitable
proportional way to how things are shifting.
Yeah, just the point that even though our county or Laramie County went up, our share went down.
Right.
Our share went down mostly because others were down. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Trustee Cato, so that's a good point, and that's part of the process, and why we go through this. In my mind, it's somewhat maddening, this recapture redistribution. And so while we haven't profiled it in the budget, as Rick said earlier, we anticipate when we get the actual numbers late July and then into August, we anticipate that the increases in valuation and thus local funding in those other districts will actually allow some of that state funds, so they recapture the state funding they no longer need because their valuation went up and redistributed we anticipate some of that coming back to us. And that's why historically we've seen some of those shifts, and it's just the basically the fluctuation of projected local revenues to when they actually come in and what happens with that. So if for example, if Sweetwater County truly is up, certainly if Natrona County is up, they will no longer need as much state aid to fit their threshold, which means the commission will recapture that and then redistribute that according to the model. We anticipate we will see some of that back. That's why during the budget cut years, it hit us so tough, because Laramie County went up, all those other counties went down. So that 8% cut by the governor really was what, 12-15% to us, because they took the state money to redistribute it back across the other community colleges. It's not a perfect system, but it actually is pretty good. And when those counties go up, we actually benefit because they need less state aid, which means more state aid comes to us.
It would help us if we were all down. Okay, moving on to the one bill. Board book page 23, page 17 in your handout. Let me first draw your attention to that first subtotal row. Where you see last year the flows in was 1.6 million. And this year, projected at 1.7 million. So that's about a $73,000 increase. That's about a 4.3% increase. That could come in even higher. That's conservative when we see that. And we've seen that in the one bill for quite a long time. It's this steady climb. You start thinking about this going out with all the valuation data. Won't be too long. We'll be at a couple $1 million a year. $1 million, unless there's some dramatic economic churn for Laramie County.
Rick, I believe when I first came on the board, it was 1.5. So in 5 years, it's gone up from 1.5 plus change to 1.73.
So then as you roll into the expenses, just to call out a few things, Eastern Laramie County, you see a dramatic or significant increase, 40 grand or so. We're moving the oversight there from a part-time position to a full-time role. That's why that's increasing. Going a little further, facilities planning. This is money we usually budget to account for the architectural needs we may have for planning facilities, level 1 reports, level 2, this sort of thing. We just don't see a current need next year for any of that. Everything's pretty much in place, what we accomplished last year. So that's why that budget's at 0. Small maintenance is normally budgeted around $500,000. We think we can go forward with a reduction there. That reduction is helping us fund the next row, which is one-time requests, which we haven't had since I've been here, and this time around we do. Back on the small maintenance, major maintenance has gone up 64%. So if we can find some ways to really creatively use that money on all of our projects in ways that state construction management would be supportive of, we can really leverage that and probably do okay with this reduction in small maintenance. The AACC pathways number, just to remind you, this is part of the 3-year commitment. I think this payment is year 2 of the 3-year. It started last year. And then, of course, what I mentioned earlier, the IT tax, IT operating expenses, and college insurance, we've moved back over to $1 million to create room on the current fund for the compensation increases. So we're whole on $1 million. Look forward to the future with $1 million. I think it's going to grow. So now we'll get into our usual pie charts. Here's your revenue comparison last year versus this year. Just to call out some key things here. You can study a lot of data on here, but you see the tuition number from last year to this year down quite a bit. We just spoke about that. What's driving that? You see the state and local are both up, and it should point out the one that says state appropriations. Don't confuse that with state payment. Because when you look at this comparison, you see that state appropriations go from 25.2 million to to 25.4 million. The reason that's up like that is because of the health reimbursement we get from the state. It's not because we've got more state aid. This state appropriations category includes state aid, but it includes several other things as well. Moving on, expenditure comparison by series. This is where we're basically looking at salaries, benefits, operating expenses, and capital outlay. You'll notice the salaries comparison up 600K, I think. That student compensation program being implemented. You don't expect to see that. You see operating expenses down quite a bit. A big chunk of that you saw other reductions that have been made. Then we get to expenditure comparison by program. This is where we look at what are called the Nakubo categories. And you see those around each of the pie charts. Important call-outs here, I think I draw your attention to academic support. It's up 180K, going from 11.35% to 12.1%. And here again, you see student services up significantly. Plant operations down. Utilities are all in plant operations. Everybody has any questions, just jump in. Please take some time studying to really kind of formulate any questions you need. Now, in the budget book, you have tabs in the back. Touch on each one of those. We're leaving the current fund now, and we're talking about the auxiliary fund. That budget's up 144,000 year over year. Our auxiliaries have done really well, by the way. We're just speaking about that again for them today. All across the board, they're healthy and they've done well. We're up 144K because room rates are up 1%, and that's planned. We may recall with our res hall modeling, we developed a 30-year plan, maybe as long as 40 years in some cases, of what the budget's going to look like there. And we have built into that a 1% increase every year. Once we get to this SLID loan and look to get the money to build the new hall, we actually be able to reduce that escalation possibly. Board rates may be up 3%. We're in negotiations with Sodexo right now over this. They've actually asked for a 5.5% increase. I've just found that to be largely unacceptable, and they've really been pushing back with Sodexo, and we're getting some progress. Judy Hay and I will be meeting with them on Monday to try to nail this part down. Another component here of why we're up 144,000 with the facility rental rates up 8%. The reason for that is, you remember we opened Pathfinder in January last year, and we got a half a year's worth of rent from UW. This year we got a 4 years worth of rent from UW for the fourth floor, so that really boosted that. Moving on to restricted funds. These are funds that are restricted to very specific purposes by external sources. We're down 1.9 million. What we're down is the Pell Grants that we've awarded are down 1.9 million. And that's because of declining, one follows the other. All other grants are roughly even. There's slight variation, but I would draw your attention to page 27 if you want to have a deeper look at federal, state, local, and private grants. They're all listed there, and you can see what their values are. This is a very stable part of our budget right now. Healthy. Then we get to the endowment fund tab in the back. You see a spend of 500,000 for scholarships. This is always a confusing part of this budget structure with the commission. This $500,000 anticipated spend in scholarships only relates to our portion of the state match, which is specifically directed to scholarships. Why this is confusing is I always have this caveat. The plan support by the foundation this year will be 1.2 million. the way, that 1.2 million is maybe $300,000 more than that number was last year. Is that right? Really remarkable. Then lastly, we have the plant fund tab. That data on your summary sheet, it's on page 38 of your book. It's up 784,000, mainly due to the major maintenance increase that we're getting from this by him. Everything else in that category is relatively flat. So I'm trying to move too rapidly. Here's your budget summary. This is page 7 in your budget book. It kind of wraps all of it up together. And I'll stop there, and if anybody has any questions,
You like to present on the SFAC budget now?
I don't think so.
Mr. Chairman, did we request help with our maintenance and repair? Where did the legislature was that one of our priorities to get that moved up a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Cadle, so without going into too much detail, deferred maintenance and major maintenance, especially with state-owned facilities, whether that's K-12, state-owned facilities, community college, university, has been an issue that the legislature has taken pretty sincere interest in. If you imagine, it was one of the driving factors that actually shifted money away from a local junior high construction project to statewide major maintenance for K-12. Based on some of the direction, the construction management division or the state construction division hired a consultant, and they did essentially an analysis of the state-owned facilities and what the deferred major maintenance needs would be for those facilities, and made a recommendation at what amount that should be funded by the legislature. I don't know how all the percentages work out. They actually recommended that it be funded at 2.5% of that deferred value, that cost, if you will. To do that, the governor proposed 2%, I believe, and that's essentially what stuck. Last biennium was approved at about 1.6 or 7, and then was further reduced as a result of the budget cuts to like 1.2%. So this reflects a significant increase in the amount of money available to take care of that deferred maintenance, but it is not even at the level that the consultant said we needed to be able to catch up and actually stay on top of deferred maintenance. So from our perspective, it's great. We saw a nice big bump, and we can address some of those maintenance issues. The recommendation is still that it should have been actually a bit higher than that, but we're tickled with the way this came out. We supported the governor's recommendation. The trick now is basically working with the state construction division so that we both agree what are the major maintenance needs and what qualify. And one area that's sort of an area of discussion is concrete parking lots and things like that. Do the concrete sidewalks count as major maintenance work? They're expensive. They need to be kept up for accessibility purposes, but there's debate, whether or not that fits that model. And so overall, it's good news for us, though, and we're very supportive of it.
Mr. Chair, and for my fellow trustees, in the past, when we get this first draft of the budget, we then review it at home, and then if we have any questions, we usually ask Jane to deal with that. This year, we're going to do it a little differently. The Finance and Facilities Committee is requesting that the first draft be referred to the Finance and Facilities Committee so that we can then take all of our questions and whatever changes we might have or suggestions, and then present that to Jane and then ultimately to Dr. Joe. So we'll have a meeting of the FNF, and I think, Rick, you would like us to do it on the 23rd? Okay, so the May 23rd at 11 o'clock, and we would encourage all of you that join us to be with us. Because, and that's a preamble to the chairman then referring to the FNF.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are no objections, but I would like to refer that to the Facility and Finance Committee, and 23rd will be the next meeting date.
At 11 o'clock.
11 a.m.
it might be longer than just 1 hour. And that'll be the only subject.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great idea.
All right.
Next question for me, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson. Knowing that that may go more than an hour, maybe or two, seems like it might be appropriate maybe if I provide the lunch.
Why not? Sure.
Does that fit within the budget, Rick?
And could we use this room if it's available? If not, we'll use a different room.
So with that said, if the trustees would let us know if you're going to be able to attend on the 23rd, this way we can get some.
I'll have Sherry send out invites in the morning, so you'll have it on your calendar.
Right. Thanks, Rick.
Then I have one other comment. Rick, I'm continually amazed at the way you can present information to us that is right on and clear and understandable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to hear that.
Yes, beautiful.
Any other questions, comments? Moving forward, thank you, Rick.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a request? I need to leave this meeting at 9 o'clock. And would you mind if we take item 3 first?
Trustee Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. As most of you know, and some of you were present, we had a meeting, a community-wide meeting for input and ideas and comments on the Fine Arts Building and how some ideas on how we could be handling the funding for the Fine Arts Building, and also what kind of support we could expect to see from the arts community in Cheyenne. And it was a week or so ago. I don't remember the date. I should have the date. A week and a half ago, about 10
April
days
25th.
ago. Thank you. I'm glad you guys remember. That's really good. We didn't have a lot of people there, but the people who were there had some very wise things to say and some very good recommendations. And so we had a good discussion. Some ideas came forward. We discussed the funding ideas, and from that discussion came basically 3 ideas that you're going to see on your agenda. The first was to place a measure on the 2018 general election ballot. That'd be the ballot in November, seeking 1 mill levy for 4 years to generate $6 million, and then the foundation would raise $1 million. We need to match the legislature's appropriation of $7 million. We need to figure out a way to do that. So the first idea that came up is the foundation will raise $1 million, and then we would go to the voters on a 1 mill levy over 4 years to generate approximately $6 million. That was the first idea. Another was to ask the foundation to secure private funds to their greatest ability and see how much they can raise. And then we would hold a special election in 2019, seeking the difference between what the foundation can raise and what we still need. And then the third was to ask the foundation to conduct a major focused capital campaign to raise the whole thing, the whole $7 million. Lisa Trimble was there as part of this discussion. We talked a lot about the pros and cons of each of those things. I think it's realistic to ask the foundation to raise $1 million. I don't think it's realistic to ask the foundation to raise $7 million. And chime in, Lisa, if I say anything wrong. We also, when discussing the special election or general election, we had a lot of talk about that, about whether it's better to just go right into the general election or to wait until till 2019 to seek a special election. And I think even though the whole group didn't quite agree, I think it was the major consensus of the group that it's probably better to go to the general election because then more people come to vote. Even though that's coming up quick, That's one of the caveats of that, but there's more people who come up to vote. And then of course, recommendation 1, which was to ask the foundation for 1 million, and we would go to the taxpayers for the other 6 million. The idea number 1 actually came from Billy Adelman on the foundation board. That was his idea, and it caught fire pretty quickly with the rest of the group. That made a lot of sense. Because then we can say to the public, our foundation is contributing. We're not asking the voters for everything. We're asking the voters for 6 million, and we at LCCC are going to work with our foundation to get 1 million of it. And so we thought politically, timing wise, realistic, looking at the realism of what the foundation can raise, I am going to recommend, and I believe that the folks there at the meeting would agree with me, I would hope. I would recommend that we take suggestion number 1 and ask the foundation to raise $1 million, and that we seek a 1 mil levy over 4 years at this general election to raise the other 6 million.
I'll second that motion, if it is one.
You can, I was just made a recommendation, but I will move. How's that? I move that we adopt option 1 and ask the foundation to raise 1 million, and we place 1 mil levy over 4 years to generate 6 million on the 2018 general election ballot.
Mr. Chair.
And Carol seconded it. Okay.
I just said, what's the increase to the taxpayer by doing this for 1 mil levy for 4 years?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Ketchum, and make sure we calculate these things so many times. So it's one mil would be $1.50 per $100,000 worth of home value per month. So to put it into perspective, I think when I ran the numbers last on a $250,000 home, you're looking at about $45 per year. For the 4 years, the total would be about $180 over the 4-year period on a $250,000 home.
And what did we do last time? It was over 20 years? For the 33 million? 15 years?
15, yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Ketchum, 15 years, and that was based on a bond, which is a slightly different approach to it. So a much longer term, we were estimating for the totality of those previous projects, of what, 29 million that, it would equate to, we thought about 2 mils per year, but over 15 years. So a significantly longer duration of time.
Is there any way to do like a hybrid or some sort of measure on the ballot to give the voter a choice as to how they want to do it? I'm just trying to sound.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, Trustee Ketchum, I know that was a concept floated at the meeting. Your attorney has actually done some quick research into that. So Tara, I'll let you answer the question.
No.
No.
So with further clarity, the statute doesn't provide a lot of direction as to that issue. No real surprise there, but in consultation with some clerks and with some of the county attorneys, and a review of the statute, that's not advisable and not legal. However, I would say just to be mindful of, I'm kind of looking at the statute and at these options that you have, the option number 2, if the first one didn't work, could still possibly be on the table, which is a pretty hard bargain, but nonetheless. You'd have to have a special election in October of 19.
No more special.
When do we have to have the specific language to
That's the option.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Ketchum, Tara was just updating me with the changes to the statute. Now, this last session, we have to notify the county 110 days prior to
July 19th.
On July 19th. I don't know that the ballot language has to be finalized on that date, though it does as well.
Yes, everything has to be provided to the clerk by July 19th.
By July 19th.
Mr. Chair.
Trustee Gabe.
with regards to the $1 million, was, Lisa, if I can ask you a question, is that something that the foundation as a whole kind of weighed in on, or where did the $1 million come up with?
So, Mr. Chairman, Trustee, I did have a chance to talk with the executive committee last week a little bit about this, or earlier this week, I guess, a little bit about it. I think it's a number that we feel is attainable and shows good faith to the community that we are working towards bearing part of the load and part of the responsibility for that. Based on conversations with individuals that are interested in this project, we do feel that it is an attainable goal for us to be able to reach within the time frame that's provided.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Oh, boy. Brenda, Trustee Little, I share your passion, your desire for moving this forward. And I also like shifting it to the 1 mil rather than going to the bond issue. Because a 4-year term is better than a 15 or a 20-year term. The part that I really have difficulty with, and I don't think I can support, number one, is I just think it's too soon. I don't think the timing is right. And as our legal counsel said, well, if it failed in November, then we could come back for a special election. 2 strikes, and then the 3rd strike, you're out. I just have a difficulty with this particular position. And I would propose an amendment, and that would be that we go with a 1 mil levy for 4 years to generate approximately 6 million, and that the foundation would raise $1 million, and that we have it at a special election in November of 2019. That would be my amendment. If there's a second, fine. If there's not a second, well, the amendment fails. So, but that's, I cannot vote for that particular motion as it stands.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, what do you mean by it's too soon? It's too soon for what?
Oh, I think it's too much on the heels of the last election.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Okay.
Yeah, we just had an election. Now,
Oh.
the issue of, I know I was at that meeting about the general election and the special election, that we have more people coming to the general election. But if you recall, in 2013, we had a special election, and we won that election by 60%, over 40%. So I just don't think that it's necessarily a general election or a special election. I think we just need more time to communicate to the community why this is needed.
Okay. Thank you.
So if there's no, is there a second?
I would like to second that, because I'm in agreement with the idea that it's too soon. And I'm just trying to figure out, I don't have any information for that, but just thinking about voter fatigue as far as these kinds of things. But I also have a question, trying to understand the 7 million that the state is going to give. Is that an all or nothing kind of thing? So if we raised partial, is it match partial? Is it all or nothing?
All or nothing.
All or nothing. Okay. So that makes me think that more time is needed to have a better result.
Can I add something else though? If we don't raise the money before the supplemental budget, they can take it away.
When's that?
That'll be coming up before 2019.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jess. That's one reason also why we were looking at the general election, to make sure we don't lose the money.
Mr. Chair, I don't get responsive to that threat. I don't believe that the legislature would take away, they gave us 2 years, not 1 year and then another review. I don't have sympathy for that particular threat.
But Mr. Chairman.
Science initiative.
There's a lot of things I could use that funding for.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, the legislature put it into the budget for this biennium. But when the legislature goes back into session, they can change the budget and take it out.
Not saying they will, but they can.
They could.
Well, they can do a lot of things.
Yes, they can.
I think the key question before us is, do we have the amount of time to inform the community about why this is needed, why we have to have a renovation of our current fine arts building, the importance of an auditorium to our overall arts and theater activities at this campus. And that's one issue. The other issue that I bring to your concern is, at least I hope I do, is that my sensing, and I've talked to a number of people. Now, my folks are probably more my age that I talk to, rather than the people that are your age. And I do not get a sense that we could pass this in November.
Mr. Chairman, we also had some discussion about the naming of the project and how folks perceive it. We also had some discussion about the revenue right now that the Clay Building is bringing in to LCCC. And I believe, as does most of the arts community, that if there was a facility here that could be utilized, that it would be often, just like the Clay Building is. If we had an auditorium that held 400 people, where it's more than just putting on plays and concerts, but could be utilized by the community for other purposes. It's the size of an auditorium that's really missing in this town. We have a couple of places that can hold 250 people. We have the Civic Center that can hold 1,500. But that 400 size would be unique, and I think used a lot by the community. And this building that's being renovated isn't just music and theater. It also has classrooms. Joe talked about that at the meeting as well, that there were, if you want to talk about that a little bit more, there are other classrooms and uses for that building other than just theater and music.
Well, Mr. Chair. Trustee Little, you're preaching to the choir. I'm 100% with you. I'm just saying, I don't think we can win this in November.
Okay.
That's what I'm speaking of.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing, they've had a year, the public has had a year already to take what we've given them from the failed election. We're just rebooting it and giving them one packet instead of three that they can narrow into and see what it's about. So that's where I sit on the spectrum. Is they've had a year, so it's not like we're just throwing this out all of a sudden. It's they've voted down what we gave them before. We've listened to their concerns. The legislature gave $7 million to this project. We're putting it into a package with the foundation giving funding, and then we're giving it back to them how they wanted it. So, I mean, I don't know if we need another year on top of 7 or 8 months to explain that to them.
Well, then let's not do it in November. Let's do it earlier in the spring.
You just don't want it in the general elections.
I just don't want it. I am speaking against having it so soon. I think the timing is, but we had lots of issues with timing the last time. And I think the perception in the community that I speak to and listen to, they would endorse what I just said.
No, and I understand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mr. Chairman, Joe, who can give us some information on educating the public? Would that be Lisa or you, or who can talk to us a little bit about the time involved in educating the public for an election?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, Certainly, I agree with Trustee Erickson's perspective. I think we feel that there's a very, very short time frame to do this type of election, and considering a general or a special election in a year would give us that additional time. And there's some appeal to that, and we've considered that and looked at that. There are a couple of things that would suggest, we're not sure that would result in a better outcome than looking at the general election. First, Trustee Ketchum's point are valid. We spent, the better part of 9 months educating the community and getting out about 3 projects and spent a lot of time. I don't know that I agree with Jess. We're not starting from scratch in terms of the need, the project, the design. And in some of the feedback, received, I think things have changed with that. So I do believe we're starting, from not from ground zero. We actually have the opportunity to move forward with that. 2 is the cost escalation piece, and to just give you a rough idea, every year that we wait, Rick, what are we calculating? 4 or 5% cost escalation, or even more now?
Well, we're advised, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, 6%. So that's 840,000 each year.
Yeah, so then the price goes up, and that's another not quite $1 million we've got to come up with. And then the third one really is the voter turnout piece in the special election. And I agree with Trustee Erickson. We were successful in 2013 on that project with almost an identical voter turnout, about 9,000 voters, I believe, doing that. And it was completely inverse to what this election presented, which is interesting. But we've looked at the voter turnout statistics and the special elections, and these are consistent with the one even in 13. We got, I didn't even get 10% of the 18 to 45-year-old registered voters turn out in the special election. Not even 10%. That came out, less than 20% of the 45 to 60. The majority of the votes cast in the special election were people that were 60, and actually when you get into it, 55 and above. To do that, when you compare that to the general election, now last 2016 was a presidential election, and an interesting one to say the least. But we had 84% of those 18 to 45-year-olds that showed up. Generally, the demographic we know that are more favorable for these types of investments to that. So from getting your target population to the polls, the general election is probably the place that's going to happen. And that's really those 3 reasons why I've reluctantly sort of put my support against that first option. But it's not ideal. I don't think the campus, any of us want to go back out. We know it's a short time frame, but we're also to that point where, we've got the state funds. We've reduced this down to about as small of a request to the community as we could feasibly do. We've never been this close to getting this project done. I'm kind of the point where let's push it in and let the community decide, do we want to do this or not? And if we don't, then we turn the state money back and we talk about scaling back our programming there and do something different. I mean, I think we've got to come to that point. Some of you will remember more than 6 years ago now, sitting in this room when we pitched the Building Forward plan, and this project was not on the list because we knew the challenges it had. There was some very impassioned pleas by people that said, let's add it. It became part of that priority plan. And this is about as close as we've ever been, and I think we ever will be. And so, I'm not saying that we couldn't do it in the special election. It creates some challenges, as I've said. My guess is if we're going to get this passed, it's going to be with a significant number of that voting generation. That's 18 to 45, 18 to 50. And our best chance to get them to the polls is going to be in this general election. So that's my half-hearted explanation, perhaps, of how to do this. But if we want this done, and if the community does, this is probably our best opportunity, at least in my opinion.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure when you say our best opportunity to do it in this coming general election rather than holding it in the spring.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, if the voter turnout demographic-wise stays consistent in the next special election, I think we've got a better shot in the general election, even with the compressed timeline.
Well, I haven't agreed with you sometimes. And this one I disagree with you. I'm sorry. That's just the way I feel on it. And, I cannot vote for the November election. The last time I had some concerns that I expressed, and I went along and voted aye. But this time I will not
vote aye. I'll be no.
Trustee Erickson, you have an amendment to
Yes.
the original motion.
Right.
Can you say that again for us?
Okay, it would actually be that we would have a special election of the 1 mill levy for 4 years to generate approximately $6 million. And raise $1 million through private fundraising matches the state's $7 million appropriation.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, we had a second.
Second.
Any more discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No.
3 no.
4 no's.
4 no's.
Where was it for?
Wendy.
Wendy? Was that you, Wendy?
It was me.
Okay.
Amendment fails. So back to the original motion to place the measure on the 2018 general election ballot. Any more discussion? It's been moved by Trustee Little, seconded by Trustee Merrill. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I,
All those opposed?
No.
No. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Trustee Little, I know you have to step out.
Yes, my husband and I are catching a plane at 1 a.m, so we have to.
1 a.m.
you can stay somewhere.
We got to go to Denver.
Safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we are going to back up, and Trustee Erickson, Trustee Salazar, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, Trustee Salazar and I, we both attended the WAC board meeting and also the commission meeting. I'll give a report on the WAC board meeting, and Trustee Salazar will give a report on the commission meeting. So he'll have some comments over and above what Dr. Joe presented to us. We met last month for the WAC board. As you know, Trustee Salazar and I are your elected representatives to the WAC board. There are 14 members on that board, 2 from each of the colleges. And we meet about 4 times a year, usually at the same time the commission meets. I won't go into all the details because we discussed some of that at the last meeting about what we're doing for our education functions in the fall. Aaron Taylor, our executive director, gave a nice review in Laramie on that. So I won't cover that again. There is one area that I think is kind of important for us to keep in mind, discuss a little bit. Not now, but we'll bring it up at a later time. Since we have only 14 members on this board, it's not easy to get rotation for officers. And I think one of the reasons for that in our discussion at the board level of the WAC is that the WAC bylaws call for an election of the representatives to the WAC board every December. So it's an annual potential turnover. And so right now, I think we have 3 people of the 14 that have been on the board for more than 3 years. So there's not a lot of longevity and continuity and institutional memory, if you will. So there's going to be some discussion between the board members about changing that bylaw to every 2 years. And it would be after the election, so that when I say the general election. Now here I'm in favor of talking about a general election, okay? So that after the general election in December, that instead of a 1-year term for your representatives on the WAC board, it would be 2 years. The other thing that I'm going to point out to you is that you recall that Dr. Joe sent out an email of the executive director of the Association of Community Colleges of Trustees, Noah Brown. He gave a presentation at a leadership institute down in San Antonio.
And that presentation was witnessed by folks from Western College. The president of the college, Carla Leach, and also the chairman of the board, George Eichmann. And they were very impressed with that presentation. And so he recommended, George recommended that we have a presentation by Carla of that PowerPoint of what is the new normal dealing with what's the future of the colleges, where we are, where we've been, and where we're headed. So we're going to arrange for that to happen, possibly this coming June meeting, if not then at a subsequent meeting. Other than that, I don't have anything else to report unless Trustee Salazar might have something on it.
No, not really. I think that covers it.
All right. So that would be the end of my report.
Thanks. All right. So then I'm on the second part of the commission report, and President Chief has already given some insight to that. So I'll just kind of touch on some things that I think might be important. Things I heard. One was Brent Bacon from the Department of Ed, and this might have implications for the community colleges. He said that the computer science goal, which has been added to the grad requirement, and they need 500 teachers certified. And I think that has implications for community colleges to say, how can we possibly help in that role, get in 500 teachers certified with that computer science requirement. The other thing, President Chief has already talked about the endow somewhat. And then this was the one thing that in the June meeting coming up is the tuition policy. And Casper College stated during this meeting that they're very pleased that the commission has held off on the tuition cap. But then that is a whole concern about whole discussion and the commission's concern on how do fees play into the cost for students, among other issues. And there's a lot of implications from the tuition issues. And I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but Trustee Erickson asked if the commission would be willing to get input from the WAC in forming the policy. And they said yes, but that we should provide that information early before the June meeting. So that's something that we have to think about as trustees and maybe feedback to Trustee Erickson and myself on your any concerns about the tuition policy that might be in anything, right? The attainment goal fits in with that. Jim Rose had said part of that is who's not on our campus as far as tuition policy. So it's kind of wide open in terms of what you might give feedback for this. And kind of the last thing, I'll be kind of brief on this. I wish Trustee Little had stayed here. There was a tour also of the facilities in Torrington. And one of the things that both Trustee Erickson and myself, I think that I'm very much in favor of the fine arts, but especially when you look at the Torrington Fine Arts Facility, it's beautiful. I took pictures, I should send them to you. It's better than our Civic Center in many ways. And how can a place the size of Torrington, less than 9,000 people, have that beautiful facility? So maybe the voters think differently than our voters do. But wasn't it amazing? Yeah. It was totally amazing. It looked like something you might see in some giant city or huge city, not Wyoming. That's just my final comment.
I would just have one addition. Yeah. When the commission is going to be meeting in their retreat in June, and they're going to address this issue of the tuition, a tuition strategy. And recently, Dr. Joe sent us a copy of the SHEHO, the SH State Higher Education Executive Officers, which reviewed how tuition is being addressed in the various states. And it's interesting, it lists about 7 or 8 areas of or principles of interest, such as affordability and the need for monies for institutional instruction,
and some other areas, and also various ways to put tuition together and have it go over a period of time so that you got some stability to the tuition increases or not increases. And I would encourage our fellow trustees to look that particular email up again and give maybe any of your thoughts to us, because we're going to have a discussion, both Trustee Salazar and I, along with the other WAC board members, to give our thoughts on what the commission can do. And that'll be in somewhat of conjunction with the presidents, because we look to the presidents for a lot of guidance. And most likely we'll react in a positive way rather than trying to modify what the presidents are going to come up with. But we're given the opportunity as trustees to give our input.
Thanks. Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, so on to the President's Evaluation and Contract Negotiations Committee. We're going to talk about that some more. Do you want to add anything to that right now?
Yes, I would like to present what I have. Is that okay? Or do you want to do it?
Go for it.
Okay. This is what I've been doing, and the committee, we met, Jeff, Brad, and I met with Tara and Joe and had a good conversation about his evaluation as well as his contract. But what I present right now is his evaluation. Thank you, Vicki, very much for everything you've done in the last 2 years. I really appreciate it, as well as does this board. And thank you, Tammy, for your input and for listening to me in the last couple of weeks about this. We're going to proceed, and we're going to receive the document on the 16th of May, and we're going to get information at that time to fill it out and to return it. We're going to get it electronically. To return it, that's the deadline. June 1st is the deadline, because then we'll have to move ahead on the 20th of June with Dr. Schaefer will come up with these goals for next year. Is that correct? Or you will cover your goals that you achieved in the past year?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Merrill, per your policy and procedure, I actually will owe you a self-evaluation for the end of your evaluation, which you'll receive from me at your June meeting. As I've done in the past, that will not only cover my self-evaluation of the goals we set forth this year, but also include my recommendations for goals for the coming year. And so you'll receive that prior to your June meeting, but it'll be for your discussion during your June meeting.
Thank you very much. I asked for people's feedback, if they had any questions they wanted particularly asked on this evaluation. I heard nothing, but what I had heard during this meeting with the committee and Tara and Dr. Schaefer was that we not have any questions about budget or enrollment, because we pretty much covered those subjects extensively. So if you have any new information or things that you want to have Joe accomplish with those questions in mind, please do so, that we're going to avoid the goals of budget or enrollment. That's it. Thank you. Anybody else have anything?
Mr. Chairman, it was just you, Tara, Brad, and I that met. Joe wasn't at the meeting,
there.
not the first meeting, to discuss his, you had two meetings.
The first meeting.
Correct.
I'm sorry,
So,
this is the one.
yeah, I just wanted to state that, so it's not like Joe's in.
You're right. We met in
Yes.
Tara's office. He was not there.
Yes,
You're
correct. All right, I just wanted
And then
to
we
point that out.
met with Dr. Schaefer. Thank you. And that's all. Unless you have something.
Any questions?
Are you saying you still can provide you input?
No, it's already
Okay,
prepared.
all
I'm so sorry.
All right,
Next year.
next.
Thanks, Jess.
All right, the Finance and Facilities Committee, Trustee Erickson.
Well, given the time, I'm going to move that we approve the financials for April 30 and also the procurement
report, contracting report, which we reviewed at the committee this morning.
I'll second it.
Moved by trustee Erickson, seconded by trustee Ketchum. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, on to our ex officio trustee updates. Trustee Jake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hammond has, in coming over on the right today, this evening, I should say that the fermentation science program looks like it's got some pretty good movement. And so he's going to be crunching some numbers and some data from a survey that they did around in the region. But it looks like that one's got some momentum. And as you probably heard at our board meeting in April, anyway, that the Albany County campus has done a little bit more with hybrid type programs and type of a learning session between both in classroom as well as online. And I think we're all anxious to kind of hear some results and see what student success and student responses might be to some of that more active programming that we're doing at that campus. Something pretty different from what you're doing here at the Cheyenne campus. So those are a couple of things that I know he's going to be working on. So, and that's it.
Questions? Thank you. Our student trustee, Derek Golfus.
So student government had a few special meetings. One of them over constitutional changes. We are now a 12-person Senate, down from 16-person Senate. This was largely because we were having trouble filling our full Senate every semester, and because we wanted to make it more competitive to try and weed out any problematic senators we may get. It was also to reduce the load on the president and vice president when they've got to keep track of the volunteer hours for senators and the disciplinary actions when you've got over a dozen people to take care of. There are a number of other changes we made to our constitution. The sword banquet went well. Our VP, Justin Randuano, was the moderator for that, and he introduced each new group. He did a great job. He's graduating this semester. So with that piece, I am moving up to VP. One of our newest senators, Tyler Richardelli, will be stepping up to the ex officio position. So I plan on bringing Tyler in during the summer for some of these upcoming board meetings to get him trained on being a proper ex officio, I suppose. SFAC process is done, as you may have seen in there. We had a special meeting. It took 3 hours and 15 minutes. It was a great time. And there's going to be a great big shift in student leadership this when we have 3 of our senators returning and our entire CAB board being replaced. But other than that, I don't believe there's really anything to report on. Me, current president Constance Heather, and Tyler Richardelli are going to be going to special trainings in Orlando and Washington, D.C. this summer, though. So we'll be ready to teach all of our new senators all sorts of wonderful stuff. Thank you.
So Derek, will this be the last meeting that you attend with us?
I'm going to attend some of the summer meetings.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, moving forward, I'm actually gonna skip, just give you a brief summary. I'll end up chatting with you guys probably more one-on-one about the meetings, but I do intend to have a retreat in August. Joe and I have been working together to get that programming set up for August, so we'll chat more about that next time. The additional items, hopefully you guys got a chance to read some of those, and Dr. Schaefer's article, I thought that was pretty impressive. Yeah. We got a pretty good dude amongst us. So.
No, thank you.
Yeah. congratulations to Vicki for her 30 years
Yeah.
as our amazing executive secretary. It was the most, I love that. What do you call that? The recognition dinner. Yeah. Employee recognition dinner. And we have one of the longest standing employees in this college. Thank you. And it was such a good program. If anyone missed it, it was over the top wonderful. And Tammy was one of our moderators. She was quite cute. And
Yeah, she was.
thank you.
So we have some next meetings, June 20th, July 11th. We have the Facility and Finance Committee coming up on the 23rd at 11 a.m. Any public comments? Yes, sir.
President. I'm Bill Henderson, Cheyenne resident, and I represent a district in the city. I'd like to speak briefly on the very important $7 million match. Time is of the essence. We had to fight very hard to get this through this last session. And I want to associate myself with Trustee Erickson and the others who say that the timing is important here. And as it currently stands, I don't feel that there is a mood which will support a favorable outcome. One thing that's noticeably absent in the numbers here and the approach is what's already been done in preparation for this important project and what money is already put aside to support this important project from the community college. Because, you know, I think it has to be a mixture. I think it has to be a mixture. And with that optic, I think the right marketing program to put together to make this very successful, no matter when you run the election. But if you run it too early, you're going to get the same wrong. You're going to get the same soft second verse, my view, my opinion. So once again, time's of the essence. And then briefly, I'd just like to thank Vicki and everyone here for the opportunity to listen in and sit in. I'm very encouraged. You all work very hard, and in noting the time, you give a lot of your lives to this effort for the community. Thank you for that. I stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's a question, but, while we've got the opportunity to have Representative Henderson behind the podium, I do want to just take the point of privilege to thank him. He worked hard through the session, as all our legislators did, but on more than one occasion, I was getting emails and texts and prompts from Bill saying, help me make you successful, tell me what to do, here's what we need to talk about, here's where we need to go. And so it was that continued focus and really the ability to have that relationship with the good representative that I think makes this campus successful. So for what it's worth, Bill, I sure appreciate it. Thank you for your service.
Yes. Mr. President, just briefly, I would just say, you're welcome, but it's all of us together. And if you look at this, it's going to fall in the right sequence so that we can get this done right. Because it's very important. I mean, when I attended here when I came back from Vietnam in the early 70s, it was pretty much brand new and it's been well kept. But it's important that we get it replaced and we get the right money. And I don't want to sound preachy, but I think that there's a lot of money available on the table around the state who care about our community college. You go to alumni, put a button on the website for donations. There's a lot of options. And so I just like to exercise all of them so we have a successful outcome. And I would just finish by saying anything I can do to help, say the word.
Representative Henderson, thank you. Thank you for being here as well. Any other public comment? None? All right, can I have a motion to move into executive session?
I so moved. Don't we have to adjourn? I'm sorry? To discuss a personnel matter. Move into executive session.
It's been moved by trustee Merrill, second by trustee Erickson. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Well, aye.
opposed? We now move into executive
We're gonna do
session.
some jumping jacks. Get that blood flow
Thank
down.
you all for being here.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Well,
That's right, I will.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right?
Yes.
Would you like a cookie when you're up?